Okay, with us tonight we have Rob Tribeck, right here, partner at Harrisburg-based law firm. Chip Minnemeyer, the editor of CDT. Anthony Lebrano and John Ziegler. Okay.
Hey Franco, before we start, I want to share something with everyone. As you know, a number of weeks ago, I requested that Louis Freeh return the money that we paid him. And then you saw subsequently the dialogue that I had with my board members at the Hershey meeting over the entire issue. So, I had a chance to reflect on what I should do next. And it became clear to me what I needed to do next was to, as a trustee of Penn State, request to see the files, the client files, with respect to the Freeh investigation. So on Good Friday, March 29th, I sent this letter, which I'm now making public, and it's to the General Counsel at Penn State, and it's a request for access to the client files. Dear Steve, I'm writing to seek your assistance in obtaining materials from the Freeh Group, which are the property of the Board of Trustees. These materials are required in order for members of the board to fully discharge their fiduciary obligations relative to a careful review of the Freeh report and the factual findings that purportedly support the conclusions reached by Mr. Freeh and his investigators. As I understand it, the Rules of Professional Conduct for Attorneys, Rule 1.16, contains the following legal requirement. A lawyer must make available to a former client within a reasonable time following the client's request for his or her file the following: all investigatory or discovery documents for which the client has paid the lawyer's out-of-pocket costs, including but not limited to medical records, photographs, tapes, discs, investigative reports, expert reports, depositions, and demonstrative evidence. The lawyers may, at his or her own expense, retain copies of any such materials. In accordance with this ethical mandate, I'm requesting that you immediately seek return of the foregoing materials from the Freeh Group. In particular, the board has the right to receive any and all investigative reports, records of witness interviews, and correspondence between the Freeh Group and any fact witness or outside organization. I appreciate your assistance in this matter, and I look forward to hearing from you. I will only tell you that I am in discussions with them. This request hasn't been received with open arms, but I think that it's a natural next step for us to really understand, in order for me as a fiduciary, frankly, to be able to verify the veracity of the conclusions reached by Mr. Freeh. So I wanted to share that with all of you because that one's not going away.
Anthony, we thank you for that. Yes, we do. And I also want to say, because of his courage, our Board of Trustees, led by Jim Broadhurst, are thinking about a rule that we have labeled the Lebrano rule. They're talking about implementing that rule, which they will take away the alumni vote. So they want to find a way to control the alumni. And now if they remove someone who we vote in, we have to think about what do we do? And no way do we sit down and take that. So I just want to let everybody know that if Jim Broadhurst and the Board of Trustees implements the Lebrano rule, that they're going to have a big fight on their hands from the alumni. I mean big. And like also talking about that, it also could be a legal issue. Now, we did have one big change this year, and it finally came. So what does it mean, or what message was sent when Kathleen Kane was elected? What do you think was sent, panel? Chip, what do you think?
For those who follow us, we did endorse Kathleen Kane, basically because of her pledge to look into the investigations that had preceded her. So I think that's certainly what the voters communicated they were interested in seeing happen.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for endorsing her with that. And thank you guys for all the votes. We're not sure, but like she won by a great landslide. And I want to look at this question that I have up here on the screen. Can you guys see that? Okay, this is Joe Paterno's testimony at the grand jury. And as it says, a question, what did Mr. McQuarrie tell you he had seen and where? And you can read the answer. Now, to me, if this is a conversation between Mike McQuarrie and Joe Paterno, people who know each other, and talking about a person that they know that they're talking about, does that conversation make sense? Does that make sense? I mean, when you have Mike and Joe talking, and Joe said that Mike said he has seen a person, not an older, but a mature person. Is that the way people talk to each other? That Mike and Joe would talk to each other? Is something wrong there? I mean, something to me is just not clicking that what's wrong with that conversation with Joe? Did someone talk to him beforehand and tell him something on what to say? But that just doesn't seem right. But yet, this is the information that they based Joe's firing on. His testimony on what Mike said and what Mike didn't say. And so does anybody else find that, that a little strange?
Well, certainly from the perspective of terminating anybody based solely on a grand jury presentment, that in and of itself is incredibly reckless and short-sighted. Joe Paterno was on the witness stand, I think, around 11 minutes in total. And at this point in time, nobody on the board had even bothered to reach out to Joe to ask him exactly what he said, what he meant. Remember, you have a person who is over 80 years old trying to recall a conversation in excess of 11 years ago, and the fact remains, at the point they were asking him these questions, they were telling him the wrong year. If you'll recall, they were still off by a year, okay? And this word fondling, I mean, it's come out that Joe Paterno was told that Jerry Sandusky was fondling this boy. That's not what that says. It doesn't say Mike told me he was fondling. Whatever you might call it. I mean, it looks like he was reaching for words, trying to find something. And my guess is, when we now know what Dr. Dranoff and Mr. McQuarrie Sr. testified to, I mean, the fact remains, Mike McQuarrie wasn't clear with them. I have no reason to believe he was any clearer with Joe Paterno. And frankly, that's exactly what this grand jury testimony suggests.
So, talking about the presentment, during this time, and Penn State really accepted the presentment as their basis for firing Joe. And where were Penn State's lawyers at that time?
Good Lord. In the grand jury room, obviously. Well, just by way of background, and sometimes I think we make assumptions, I've been told by folks that the grand jury presentment was a transcript of the grand jury testimony, or it was a legal finding, and it's something that's going to be used in court. Let me just quickly go over how a grand jury works in Pennsylvania. Okay, a grand jury is convened, and that grand jury hears testimony, and then that grand jury is released, and a new grand jury is impaneled. And if the first grand jury hasn't decided what to do with the case, the second grand jury picks it up. And they don't hear new witnesses, they read a prosecutor's summary of the prior witnesses. Now, who's in a grand jury room? Well, there's the grand jury, there's the prosecutor, there's the witness, okay, and then there's the witness's attorney, and of course, Ms. Baldwin. The way it works is not evidence. It is a summary that's compiled by the prosecutor and handed to the grand jury and said, will you indict? I've used this example before, and people are shocked when I do it. If you've read this grand jury presentment, and look, let's not kid ourselves. It's horrible. It's absolutely horrible. All right? But in the grand jury presentment, there's a reference to Mike McQuarrie, and the grand jury found him extremely credible. You remember that language? It said, we find him extremely credible. I mean, hey, it's not just credible, it's extremely credible. Well, guess what? The grand jury that issued the indictment never heard Mike McQuarrie testify. Let me say that clearly so there's no confusion. The grand jury that found Mike McQuarrie, quote, extremely credible, end quote, never heard him testify. They didn't look at him, they didn't hear him, they didn't see him. Now, you tell me, what value should be placed on grand jury testimony? None.
None, especially on this one. Chip, I want to ask you, you're from State College, you're from the area here, you've been here, sure you've have left and you've come back. While you were here and also while you were gone, do you know of anyone who has come forward here in State College and say they knew that Jerry Sandusky was a pedophile?
No, I don't, and I certainly think everybody was shocked when the news came out in 2011. We have heard here and there people talking about things that they thought they heard and rumors and those kinds of things, but rumors are what they are, and maybe some people in the room had heard things, I don't know, but we've even had people who are involved with kids who said they had heard things over the years, and why they wouldn't pursue them, I don't know, but nothing substantive, no, Franco, and certainly, well, obviously, the community was stunned.
Well then, how is it that Joe Paterno can, you know, and Tim and Schultz be the only one who really knows that? I mean, why did they have the right to be the only one to know?
You're asking me what they knew? I don't know what any, you know, I've read the same presentments and the same free reports you've read, and that's, you know, that's what it says. And you know, I've not sat down with any of those folks to ask them what they knew and when. But I think it's certainly, you know, it's a challenging situation.
Because how hard would it be to keep a secret like that? It'd be tough to keep a secret, right?
Presumably, sure.
And so it's a small town.
I think the thing, kind of following up on your question, and most people are surprised, is that we've not heard a lot from or about the Second Mile through this whole process, and that's an organization, obviously, that Jerry Sandusky was very involved with. And you would think if there were whispers and rumors and concerns that they would be elevated to the Second Mile, and for whatever reason, they've not been part of the whole legal process to date.
Okay. Do you feel that your paper will get more involved in this? And especially about what happened in 1998, that needs to be covered a little bit more?
Well, there wasn't a whole lot to cover in 1998, and I'm not sure how you go back in time other than to look at the people who were involved. You know, I went through our archives because I knew you were going to ask me that question, and searched for Jerry Sandusky's name throughout our electronic archives from 1998, and found a lot of things about Second Mile golf tournaments and the great linebacking group that Penn State had coming back that year, and all that kind of thing. But there was certainly nothing about anything of a criminal nature. I was on the staff at the City Daily Times then as the copy desk chief, not as a reporter. But I can tell you we never had conversations about it then. It wasn't something that anybody brought up. And we had a very, very bulldog Penn State reporter at that time who would not have overlooked something that came across her desk. So that's very interesting that it could have been this. I mean, as you know, no charges were filed in 1998, and that's typically when the media get involved if there's some kind of a formal document where somebody's charged with a crime, and that becomes, you know, public record and that kind of thing.
But Joe Paterno was charged for 1998.
And Jerry Sandusky was ultimately convicted for 1998.
Yeah. So Anthony, is Penn State the big money pit? I mean, just ask the NCAA. I mean,
Well, you
ask Louis Free.
You know, you do know. I mean, we have a rainy day fund, right? I know Al Clemens is in the room. He's trying to find out how much we have in that. Al, have you found that out yet?
About 200 million at this point.
Well, you know, it's obviously it's disconcerting. We spent a lot of money. There's going to be more spent. It's very disconcerting. It's something that I'm certainly attempting to address, but it's very, very difficult. You know, the challenge we face here is there's an acceptance of recommendations, I think blindly, and those recommendations come with them a cost to implement. So some of those costs are fixed, ongoing. There's obviously the cost to do whatever it was Louis Freeh did. There's obviously costs associated with the impact to the community, and those are costs you can never truly quantify. There's the obvious costs, loss in revenue to Penn State athletics and specifically football. You know,
Yeah,
it
but
just goes on
didn't
and
Penn
on.
State open itself up when it agreed to everything, and when they really said that they're guilty?
Well, I guess, you know, as a fiduciary, I can tell you I didn't agree. So if we say the we, I'm not sure who the we is. If you're talking about the administration, that's a different story.
Right. And, John, when we talk, when we look at the press, and you look at how,
By the way, I want everybody to note that I'm sitting between John and Chev.
We're cool.
I don't bite.
the-
Just ask Mark Schwartz.
Let me interject, if I could, let me just interject. And I had some people tell me I was absolutely insane for agreeing to be part of this group, including the guy sitting right beside me. But I'll tell you what, I think, I stand to learn something from being here. Hopefully something that I say will resonate, and we'll talk, continue the dialogue and move forward with that conversation, because I think that's important. And, did everybody get it right? Of course not. I mean, but I think I can tell you that everybody who worked for me and myself, we strived to get it right. And I think that's what's the critical thing. We didn't go into it with an agenda. We didn't go into it other than to cover the news as it was occurring and to watch the incidents play out. I wasn't here when the presentment came down. I came in April, about almost a year ago. I came back to State College. And this has been a gut-wrenching ordeal. And it has taken a lot of resources. And I tell you what, I think it's important that we are having this conversation, even though I haven't agreed with everything that has led up to this moment. But I think the dialogue is vital and worthwhile.
But it seems like our Board of Trustees, they still think they're right. And they
Yeah.
still do
Well,
things.
I can't speak for them, and certainly we took a lot of criticism not too long ago for sitting down with several members of the Board of Trustees, and maybe from folks in this very room, I don't recall. But I'll tell you what, I mean, that was a very candid interview, and we asked them a lot of tough questions, and it was all on the record. And without that interview, you don't have the quote, "retired 3 weeks early." So it came right out of that sit-down with the trustees. So I'm going to tell you what, I mean, we are trying to cover all the areas of this thing. It's not been easy. There was probably a time when Mr. Lebrano didn't like me very much at all. But we've kind of gotten to know one another, and we've had some conversations. And I think what has to happen is the continuing dialogue that moves us toward whatever the truth is, and that's what I hope to be part of.
Me? Have something to say? I just wanted to address the first thing you started this panel discussion with regard to what Joe said in response to that question about what did Mike McQueary tell you. Some of you may have heard that I interviewed Jerry Sandusky from prison in one of the more extraordinary experiences of my life, one that I think I'm going to regret for the rest of my life because of the way that it's all transpired. It's been physically, psychologically, and emotionally incredibly taxing, and I mean that very sincerely. But after having absorbed the 3.5 hours plus numerous letters from Jerry and numerous conversations with Dottie, and having thought about this case more than I ever dreamed would be possible over the last year and a half, I have a very different way of looking at this whole case now that I think we do ourselves a disservice if we don't consider. And that is, I'm now of the belief that it doesn't matter what Mike McQueary told Joe Paterno, because I no longer believe that was the most important conversation in this whole saga. I now actually believe that was the least important conversation in this entire saga, because I now believe that, take a look at what we've seen this past week with the Boston Marathon and what happened in West Texas and all the horrendous initial reporting, right? What Joe Paterno was getting in that conversation with Mike McQueary was the initial first unreliable report from a 2-second witness. What Tim Curley and Gary Schultz did was to do an actual investigation based upon the passing on of that initial report by Joe Paterno. And having spent 3 hours in jail with Jerry Sandusky, and knowing what victim 2 said, and knowing that Jerry, when he talked to Tim Curley, knew that victim 2 was going to back Jerry up, that Jerry would have been more than capable of convincing Tim Curley that nothing happened that night. And I don't believe anything did happen that night. And so the important conversation here was Tim Curley and Jerry Sandusky. And unfortunately, we have fallen for a trap. We have fallen for a trap that has, I believe, doomed Joe Paterno to eternal infamy, because Joe did what he was supposed to do with the information he was given. And he then let others do the investigation. And I actually believe that investigation was more than plausible based upon the information they had at the time, and may have even made sense based upon the facts of that circumstance. And so it's kind of an epiphany or a delusion, depending on your perspective, but I believe we're looking at this entire thing wrong, Franco. I truly believe that Jerry is an incredible manipulator. He, in orange fatigues, handcuffs, and behind a window, was able to convince me, one of the greatest cynics of all time, that nothing happened that night. And we know from the victim statement of victim 2, that he had every reason to believe, as he told Tim, do you want to talk to him? He'll talk to you. What was Tim supposed to do at that time? And this is all consistent with Tim's email after speaking with Joe. I have decided, I believe. Tim Curley made this decision, not Joe Paterno. And I'm not saying Tim was wrong. I'm saying we're looking at this wrong. And I'm sorry.
I want to say that talking about Curley and the Attorney General, Linda Kelly, Rob. So Tim Curley said from the beginning that Mike McQueary told him that it was inappropriate behavior. Tim Curley said that from the beginning. And then it went to trial, and the jury came back and took away the assault, but said it was inappropriate conduct or behavior. So when you look at what Curley said in the beginning, that really backs up what Curley said he was told, wouldn't you think?
Well, not only does it back it up, but if you look at the very first persons that Mike McQueary talked to after he witnessed this incident, who were they? His father and a close family friend who he obviously trusted. And what did he tell them? He sure told them what sounds like he told Tim Curley several weeks later. I didn't see anything. I wasn't sure what I saw. I heard something. I'm not sure. This is what I heard, et cetera, et cetera. All right? I don't care what the former Attorney General says. There's a reason that Dr. Dranoff and McQueary Sr.'s testimony to the grand jury, wasn't addressed in the grand jury presentment. Why? Because it didn't fit the narrative that they were trying to sell, right? I mean, if they had put in there, he called his father and a family friend who were mandatory reporters 15 minutes after the incident, told them he didn't see anything, but he heard some stuff and he was uncomfortable, and those mandatory reporters didn't tell him to call the cops. How can they then pin this blame on Tim Curley or Gary Schultz? It doesn't make sense. Well, that's why it wasn't in the grand jury presentment.
But why did the media give Dr. Dranoff, why did they give Mike McQueary's dad, why did they give them a bye?
Well, because if the story was, look, Joe Paterno did everything right, but this athletic director might have done something, some vice president of finance would have done. That's not selling newspapers. It's not selling press. I'm sorry, I think highly of Chip here, but he has a job to do, and that's sell newspapers. All right, the media frenzy that ensued after this was laughable. Absolutely laughable. That's why. They didn't want to give Joe Paterno a pass. It wasn't selling newspapers on November 5th. John's movie, it shows Sarah Ganem's headline, and I think that's unbelievable that on November 5th it said Paterno praised for doing the right thing. Yet somehow, with no change in circumstances or facts, 4 days later, the entire narrative have changed. Why? Because it wasn't trending on Twitter high enough. So they changed the narrative.
And that's, go ahead, Anthony. Here you go, Anthony.
I think the reason is that on Monday, there was a change in directive from the Attorney General's office. You might remember that on Monday, the Commissioner of the State Police got on his and decided Joe hadn't met his moral obligation. Now, you know, that, yeah, I didn't say that. But there are some who would suggest very strongly that that's the directive. So, you know, you have the answer to that question. And frankly, it appears that some didn't like the impact that the story had politically, and so they needed to change that narrative. The bigger question for me is why, as fiduciaries, we didn't defend the institution.
Real quick, Franco, just the next step of that narrative, see, we had the Noonan comments. The next key step, which I referred to in the movie, but it requires a lot of knowledge from the viewer, which is one of the problems in trying to articulate what really happened here. It's too complicated. I want to make sure people understand this is really important. Sarah Gannon wrote an article that night, that Monday night, claiming that the moms of victim 1 and the moms of victim 6 were blaming Penn State and Joe Paterno. That was the headline. And that drove the narrative for the next 24 hours. I have watched hours and hours of ESPN coverage. I can't tell you, they didn't go 15 minutes without talking about that story. They had Sarah Gannon on. She was on CNN. She was on NBC, MSNBC, ESPN. Never once did she clarify that's not the truth of the matter. The mom of victim 1 did not blame Penn State. The mom of victim 6 is a nut job who had absolutely no right to be blaming Penn State because for 13 years after the 1998 investigation, she approved of Jerry Sandusky having a relationship with her child, and there was not one allegation of abuse after that. It was an absurdity. And it was, I believe, journalistic malpractice that changed the narrative, creating a momentum which John Surma then used to cancel Paterno's press conference, and at that point, all bets were off. That was when the narrative was forever gone and changed, and that's what happened, and that was because of someone who won a Pulitzer Prize in this case, okay? That's where the media is today.
Let's John makes a good point about 1998. Let's just talk about that for 1 second. All right, think about how the narrative would look different from the start if way back in November it came out that in 1998 there was an allegation that was determined to be, quote, unfounded, end quote, against Jerry Sandusky, determined by the Department of Public Welfare and by the office, the district attorney's office of Center County. And if they talked about an investigation being conducted that involved multiple police forces, multiple children and youth agencies, okay, and DPW, which is the highest ranking agency charged with enforcement of these laws. What if that had come out in 2011? The answer would be people would be looking at the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania saying, what the hell happened in 1998? You had him in your sights, you're hiding in a closet, and he's talking about wanting to kill himself because of what he did, and you let him walk out the door. Who do you think the media would have pointed to if that had been the story? They would have pointed to the Commonwealth. So who changed the narrative?
But the whole thing gets to be why. And that's the part sometimes we're scared to go down and say, why? If there are no real answers, if there's no evidence, no facts, no nothing, then what does that mean? To me, it either means that there's some other sort of cover-up or it gets personal. And because there are no facts, no evidence, no nothing else. And so, as I said, one thing that we want to do is we want to talk about everything. And when it gets personal, I think that that gets to be a very touchy subject. But that's a subject that has to be part of this whole thing, because why was Penn State and Joe Paterno attacked? It really made no sense. And all the evidence that we have, and you saw Ray's presentation, Eileen's presentation, it makes no sense. So who directed it to Penn State? And who directed it to Joe Paterno? And those are the answers we want to find out, and those are the answers that we're still seeking, but we haven't got any definites yet on that. So, but it is something very important to us. Okay? So, I know time is running out here, but we will take some questions, a couple of questions. Anybody have questions? Yes, sir.
Can you talk about the decision for Penn State not to join the Corbett suit And if you can, just repeat the question, what they asked you, please.
The question was, can I speak to Penn State's decision not to join the governor in his antitrust action? Short answer is the university we can't file an antitrust action, but the long answer is I have no comment.
You know what, then when you see the consent decree and Penn State signing that, that was totally ridiculous too.
Based on what they agreed to in the consent decree, that would make it very, very difficult for Penn State to challenge the consent decree if, in fact, the president had the authority to execute it, which I think is a dubious conclusion.
Yeah.
I have a question for Chip Menemeyer. Okay. I have a question for Chip. You've committed some egregious journalistic problems in your writings that I find troubling. I could respond in equally yellow journalism with questions, but I will ask you one that you have committed much more recent than the Franco article. You were in possession of a David Paterno letter, as we all were. The essence of his letter was to speak with great clarity that there was no love between the Paterno family and the Suey family. That was his whole essence for writing the article. This comes from a young man that is a very reserved young man, almost a shy young man. For him to write was a lot for him to do. When you reported on his letter, you created a crime of omission. You did not report the essence of his letter. The only thing you reported on was...
Please get your question. Please get your question.
The question is, the only thing that you reported on was his recommendations for the Board of Trustees. Using your word narrative, that didn't fit your narrative because the CDT has already told us that they want Paul Suey reelected.
Okay, thank you.
Why did you create that crime of omission from the Paterno letter?
Before Chip responds, I want to say something. First, I really hope none of us in this room truly believe that the Chip or the CDT has an interest in any particular candidate getting elected. Because if you do, he doesn't. Now, how things are reported, you could take exception with some of the style, but I honestly don't believe it. I'm sitting on the board, and you all know I'm actively campaigning this election. I don't believe it for a second, so.
Okay, let's get to a question. Let's get to some more questions. Yes.
Well, there's a short answer to his question, and
Go on,
that's,
Chip.
we actually, every letter that's sent to us, we verify and get permission to print, and we've never gotten the permission to print that one as a letter to the editor. We did, it was flying around on Twitter on a Saturday afternoon, and a reporter wrote about the letter being out there, but we wanted to run the thing in its entirety. We've not yet heard a response that says, go ahead and run it.
Okay, thank you.
And that's the truth.
I have two quick questions. Has Dave Joyner appointed himself permanent athletic director, and can he do that? And also, if they're so worried about our football culture, why is there so much money and interest in this new big hockey rink?
The first question is Rod Erickson named Dave Joyner athletic director on a permanent basis several months ago, and his term will expire with Dr. Erickson's term. No, there will be a search committee that will be created to seek the next athletic director.
And the first thing that has to happen is the next president's chosen, correct? And then that's
And they don't ask for our
That's a
opinion.
process that's underway.
Right, and then as far as the second question is concerned, Terry Pagula made a very generous gift to the university. He committed quite a long time. It was actually over $100 million with the additional money that he paid, okay. And that's been long in the making. I don't know that speaks to a culture issue. I think we all know we don't have a culture problem at Penn State.
Yeah, we all
It gets
know
under our
that.
skin. So,
Okay, next question.
Yes, you referred to the time when Sandusky was being interviewed, being questioned by the mother. There was a 125-page report done by the University Police and the State College Police, which had to go to Schultz because he was the head of the University Police. And if it went to Schultz, it certainly had to go to Spanier, and we don't know to who else. And that was back in 1998. So I frankly, I know that Griecar disappeared. He may have had very good reasons for not indicting at that time if he didn't have enough evidence. But it seems to me that there was at least some indication that there was a problem.
Let me tackle something here. First, I don't think that factually you're correct. I don't think it's been established. Certainly, the attorneys for Dr. Spanier have made very clear that their only knowledge of 98 were those 2 emails. The only one that I'm aware of who had that report from an administrator standpoint was Gary Schultz. So factually, I don't think that's correct.
Gary would have been the only one that could legally have that report. The law forbid, just to be clear, the law forbid Penn State to do anything with that report. You got to understand, it wasn't just Ray Griecar, and I think that's a common misconception. People say the DA decided not to prosecute. The DA couldn't prosecute because the Department of Public Welfare, who's charged with investigating child endangerment of this nature, they concluded that the report was unfounded. Okay, they have 3 options. They can make no conclusion, they can make a suggestion of child abuse or finding of child abuse, or they can find it unfounded. Here, it was unfounded. That means they concluded that whatever it was that was in that 125-page report did not suggest, not that it wasn't, it didn't even suggest child abuse. We may all disagree with that, and I sure as hell do. But you know what? That's what they said, and they're the people who are the professionals. That, to me, is a troubling point, and one that, frankly, maybe the CDT should be asking DPW, why'd you reach that conclusion?
When the other part to this is, with respect to that report, is that, you know, there were 2 reports, one from Alicia Chambers that apparently was never considered, and had that report been considered, you might have had a different outcome. But without that report, you know, they were left without the ability or the information to charge him.
Far be it from me to take a contrarian view on anything, but I actually believe that the 98 decision not to indict was a sound one. Let's take a look real quick about what they faced at that moment. They had a football legend who ran a massive child's charity for at-risk kids with 1 allegation that was verified of a hugging episode in a shower. Now, in retrospect, we've heard a lot about in hindsight, in retrospect, that looks, as you said, as an indication of trouble. It could very easily have been seen at the time as the inevitable reality of a guy with boundary issues who is around troubled kids all the time. So if they had tried to prosecute Jerry Sandusky on that 1 allegation, a football legend, and that's bringing down the second mile based on that, no wonder Griecar didn't take it. That would have been insanity from a prosecutorial standpoint. But it's only in retrospect that it seems stupid now.
I agree with you completely. I can say from sitting through, and that might be the biggest revelation of the day. And I'm not a legal expert, as you know.
This is on film, too. I want you to know that.
This is based on being in the courtroom when that particular victim testified in Jerry Sandusky's trial, and I left there thinking they were right. There was no criminal activity. No, it was disgusting, and I had a problem with it, and I thought it went way beyond what an adult man should do with a young boy. But I just didn't see criminal activity there. I completely agree with their decision based on his testimony in the trial.
Yes, but then, they also say, where did Alicia Chambers' report go? But we have a question back here. And, yeah, Dick, go ahead.
Again, I think to Mr. Lebrano, Mr. Turbic,
You can speak up, please.
if they would handle, I think they can handle this question. I think I understand why the university does not want to challenge the NCAA at this point in time. However, technically, could they, based upon the fact that they were actually coerced into making the decision to move forward with the sanctions?
My answer is easy. I have no comment.
Yeah, you know, the idea, and that's an excellent question, and it's one that quite frankly, I have been wrestling with. Unfortunately, short of a couple of brave trustees, we don't have enough trustees who are willing to stand up and say it. The issue of coercion.
Rob, the president said it.
The president has said it. He has said he was strong-armed into it. The problem is, he agreed. At the end of the day, he agreed. And he claims he got legal counsel. He claims competent legal counsel that advised him to take the deal. Who's the name of the lawyer? Gene Marsh.
Yeah, but I believe that no way would Rod Erickson do anything without the total approval of the executive committee.
Well,
No way would he do that. Matter of fact, that's why they got rid of Spanier, because he had too much power, and no way they're going to give someone that much power to make a decision like that. To give away $60 million, that's a huge decision. So I'm not buying that.
We have asked Penn Staters for Responsible Stewardship as a follow-up, I guess, right around the time Anthony asked. We made a request for the university for a detailed list of documents, some of which include any and all communications between Dr. Erickson, the NCAA, between counsel and counsel for the NCAA. And I think if they ever give us those documents, Dick, I think that would go a long way to answering your question of what kind of a leg somebody would have to stand on relative to a true coercion claim.
Are you aware that Gene Marsh actually asked the NCAA for a 1-hour meeting to discuss the sanctions when they were handed down and was refused? I mean, all of this, I mean, I believe, and not being attached to the law in any way, and certainly you have a better feel, all of that, if the university wanted to stand up and move forward based upon those facts alone, I think they have a great case. And then they can go ahead and show how the NCAA actually violated their own bylaws.
Hey, I know a good lawyer who'll take the case if the university's willing to go forward for free.
Okay, Seal, go ahead, Seal.
Okay, you're saying that Penn State agreed to the sanctions.
I'm saying Dr. Erickson signed the consent
decree. To sanctions. Okay, but then how about the conversation to the press that Ed Ray had, that the sanctions were, that they were never on, that the death penalty was never on the table? If in fact Emmer used that and wasn't authorized to use it, doesn't that do something to that agreement that Rod Erickson had?
Yeah, truthfully, probably not. Unfortunately, because you know,
in my legal opinion,
it's called negotiating, and lawyers do it all the time. But make no mistake about it, somebody's lying. I mean, let's not kid ourselves. Either Ed Ray or Mark Emmert or Rod Erickson, or more than one of them, is lying to us.
Or the BOT. Yeah, we have a question in the back there. Yes. Go on. Yeah, you.
Yeah, take him the mic right quick. Thank you.
I just got a real quick question for Chip here. Through looking into the background of MBNA, I have come across articles that trace Louis Freeh to investigating a helicopter crash in 2002, if I remember the year correctly. Now, Louis Freeh stated that he had no connection to Penn State. That is a lie, because he worked for Rick Struthers, who is a big donor here at Penn State. And he's a grad of the business college as well. My question is, how is this credible, anything Freeh says, when he has a background of either covering things up or not presenting full facts? And what do you plan to do about reporting that, because that's been missed here?
Well, I think we have made mention of his relationship to Penn State. I don't know that it's been a screaming headline, but I think it has been mentioned. A lot of the people involved in this have, George Mitchell has ties to Penn State. It's an interesting kind of circular process, and trying to keep track of how everybody's involved in it has been complicated. I think that's a fair criticism of Freeh. I don't think, though, his credentials are as an investigator are necessarily destroyed by that statement. So I think you have to be a little careful.
No, probably though his investigation of FIFA and Richard Jewell, they probably have more to do with his credibility, right?
You know, Chip says something that I want to comment on, and people talk about Louis Freeh is an investigator. And I'll tell you, look, he was the top of the FBI. He knows how to do criminal investigations, okay? You know what he doesn't know how to do? Civil internal employment investigations. Because you know how many people he had qualified to do that at the law firm of Freeh, Sporkin, and Sullivan? None. Okay, you look at the list of the people.
We knew that by what
You
happened.
look at the people that he brought in to do this investigation, and you even look at how he identifies them. He talks about former U.S. attorneys, and they're really qualified criminal prosecutors. But he did it wrong. He conducted this as though it were a criminal investigation, and it isn't. Criminal investigation, there's two outcomes. You're either charged with the crime or you're not charged with the crime. A civil internal investigation, an employment investigation, lots of times you can't reach the conclusion. Why? Because witnesses aren't available. Witnesses can't be made to talk to you. Witnesses don't have to be truthful with you. There's a million reasons why an internal employment investigation oftentimes comes out with, you say, here are the facts that support this conclusion, here are the facts that support that conclusion. We can't make the decision because we don't talk to any of the important witnesses. Freeh approached this wrong from the start, and not one person has asked him how many investigations of higher education institutions, internal investigations, had he done before this one.
And so I guess it's reasonable to conclude that Louis Freeh's conclusions were unreasonable.
And I just want to say before we wrap it up that I want to get into discussion about Marianne Alexander and Ken Frazier making the statement that for corporations and businesses that they don't need due process. But how do you have an institution that has lasted and been around this long and not have some sort of process? And also, the process has to be part of your culture. What does your culture stand for? And here we are having Joe Paterno and Graham Spanier, who gave so much to this university, that how could they not have the benefit of the doubt? And to say that they can just do it because they have the power to do it, and that gives them the right to do it, that's not Penn State, and we can't allow that to happen. So once again, we have to fight this also. There's so much we have to fight. But you know what, guys? You guys are beautiful. Thank you. You're strong.
Hey,
You keep
Franco,
all of us
Franco,
strong.
quick question for you. Did you invite any board members to be here?
Oh, yes, I did. I did invite Paul Suey. I wanted to do a one-on-one interview with him, and I did invite Stephanie DeVinny. They are running for the Board of Trustees. Paul Suey never got back to me. DeVinny did get back to me and said that she had another engagement.
But Chip got them.
Yep. Yeah, thank you, Chip. Thanks for joining us. John,
We
thank you. Anthony,
appreciate
thank you.
it.
Hold on. Whoa, wait a minute. Whoa.
Okay.
I came from Los Angeles, so I'm going to get the last word here for a second. This year and a half journey has been the most extraordinary thing that I've ever experienced. It's been incredibly difficult, and viewing humanity in some of the worst circumstances that I can ever recall. I think we've seen the good, the bad, and the ugly, and I find one of the great ironies in this entire thing, and there are many, is that the two people who have gotten the worst publicity in this entire affair, other than Jerry Sandusky, are Joe Paterno and Franco Harris. And it is, in my opinion, that the two people who have actually acquitted themselves the best in this entire affair were Joe Paterno and Franco Harris. And without Franco Harris, we would be nowhere. And Franco, thank you so much for... I just want to finish by saying that I've learned a lot about a lot of people in this situation, and growing up as a Philadelphia Eagle fan, I never thought I would say this, but
Go Eagles!
Franco, you're the best, man. Thank you so much for all your support.
All right. Hey, guys, you're the best. You know, we're fighting for Penn State. So, hey, let's make sure we keep on fighting, right? We never give up till we find the truth. Thank you for being here.